It's the same as leaders. It's you're no longer in control. And actually, a lot of it is becoming more passive and allowing the kind of energetic complexity emerge. Seeing the patterns where you need to intervene where they don't really understand what they're doing. But other than that, just trust the emergence.
How do we navigate the challenges of the new world of work?
How can we do things differently, transforming our people and our organisations for the better?
It turns out there's quite a lot of later stage people in there, but they're hiding.
One of the things that surprised us when we first started working with the VUCA skills is how bad they were. Like, nobody had them.
The confusing aspect of the transformation process, and to consider in their own mind, maybe something right is going on with me.
Who is challenging our thinking and living at the edge of work?
And what can we all do to embrace new ways of working?
The reality is not a single job is without impact.
Around that want to try a different way of working, I think now's a really unique opportunity to do so.
Welcome to the What's Next podcast. I'm Dave Yates.
And I'm Peter Holiday.
Today we've got Dr. Richard Claydon. He's the Chief Cognitive Officer of EQ Labs, an extended intelligence network focused on the future of leadership, culture, management, engagement, and risk. His research on value-creating behaviours in toxic, rigid, autocratic organisational environments has been described as a touchstone for the future of work, management, and organisation. Outstanding in daring and imagination and thinking at the forefront of modern discussion and debate. He teaches the leadership module of the Macquarie Business School, world-leading, future-focused Global MBA. And we've got the pleasure of speaking to him for just on an hour and a bit today. So thanks very much and welcome, Richard.
Well, Richard, welcome.
Welcome.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah,
Really
thanks for
appreciate
turning up.
Yeah, definitely. Where do you join us from?
I'm sitting in my bedroom, which is my work from home office in the middle of Hong Kong, or actually the eastern side of Hong Kong, in the middle of our biggest lockdown so far.
Oh, wow.
Really? And how long has that been going on for now?
Well, we've had sort of variations of the lockdown for about 2 years, but now we've got ridiculous rates of COVID. Fortunately, mainly Omicron, but we've been in this kind of situation now since January, I think.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
so
wow.
a couple of months.
So in and out, depending on the cases, or
just an increasing degree of you can't do anything. I don't think we've ever been as badly impacted as you were in Australia, where you weren't really allowed to even go for a walk at times. We're allowed out, but it's pouring with rain, so that doesn't help. I mean, it's literally if you're outside ever, you have to have a mask on, even when you're hiking in the middle of nowhere. You've got a mask and things like that. So we're in that situation.
Yeah, don't want to give the raccoons COVID, right? Out in the middle of the forest somewhere. Excellent. So once again, thanks for joining the podcast, and thanks for taking the time out from your what seems like very wet and restricted day to talk to us about the future of work and transformation into the future of work. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to where you are and where you've ended up at the moment, and the kind of work that you're currently engaged at or with?
I mean, I've always been in sort of adult education in organisations. That was sort of what I've always done is teach. I mean, I used to teach soft communications and negotiation skills and actually effective reading, given the amount of emails that we have and stuff like that. But I did a PhD on organisational irony back in. Yeah, I think
that's amazing.
That's ironic.
That's the podcast. We're done.
Yeah.
We're done.
So I genuinely have a doctorate in irony, and that sort of informs the work I do now. And so the basic, we also call it misbehaviorism and stuff like that, where we're looking at really the notion that the current systems that we've designed are causing absurdities in organizations, and the challenge of saying this is absurd, actually you get your head cut off and you get fired, and you're seen as a troublemaker who doesn't fit. what we're looking at, and COVID's been really good for this, because people are now beginning to take it quite seriously, that actually the systems that we have in place are causing harm and not health. And what do we need to do about it? So that's the kind of stuff that I do research wise and intervention wise. We're really focused on building extended intelligence networks so this is no longer just you've got collective intelligence within a team, but you're moving into other aspects of the internet and your extended network to start solving challenges. And we look at leadership, culture, and we're going to talk a lot about those two, engagement, risk management as the 5 kind of things within this notion of work is massively transforming, and we have to reimagine them all.
And you do this as part of a university too, I believe?
So I teach the leadership module for Macquarie Business School's Global MBA. So that I wrote it. I designed the whole thing from scratch, which is a very unusual thing to get to do as an academic, because normally you inherit somebody else's course. If I was doing it again today, I'd redesign it even further. I mean, I think it's my thinking has moved on a lot since then. So I think it was about 3 years ago I designed it. But it's a real opportunity to sort of say, hey, look, there's all this other stuff about leadership that in the mainstream you don't get any access to. And let's talk about that in an MBA program to try and get you ready earlier for leadership positions. And so that's what I try and do with that program.
So what were the main insights you felt, I guess, not only did you feel were useful, but have landed and made a significant impact in teaching the course that you redesigned?
So, I mean, basically what I do, and the reason, because I've left academia and they asked me to come back, and for one reason that they wanted someone quite radical. And the second reason was they're looking at putting human behavior in the center of the MBA. So a classic MBA model, a classic MBA is you do all of the functional stuff, right? Learn marketing, learn strategy, learn finance, etc. And then you might do as an elective organizational behavior or leadership. And they went, no, we're going to do that at the center. Okay, that's first of all, you understand human behavior in a complex system, and then you can understand the other aspects of the system. So that's the big thing that I think I took away from it. And the students, when there's something like 600 reviews online for it, and that's what they're saying. They're saying that this kind of human experience of leadership, what it means as a human navigating a complex system, is what I'm taking from this course. And the fact it's not the same stuff that you get everywhere else. It gives me, it's just like I have more pathways I can walk as a leader in these systems. Yeah. So that's what people seem to get out of it.
Yeah. And what would be the specific topics you might take people through in that particular part of the course?
There's different ways of looking at it. So one level, you're just going, right, you're looking at the leadership self. Leading a team, leading a department, leading an organization, leading something that's bigger than an organization. So you've got that kind of multi-level, but you're also going through a model of this is what leadership used to look like. So a historical chronological model. So like you're going from great man theory in the 1840s through to, and the progressive leadership theories that it clashed with. And then you sort of go, well, most psychologists today say that that's irrelevant, and it's not, and you can prove it's not. And then you go into the scientific management models of leadership and management being sort of the same thing, and it's this progressive understanding of how you create a scientific model of work. And then you go into the transformational leadership stuff from the sort of 1960s, 1980s onwards, and you say, well, all of these are different ways of thinking about the discipline of leadership. None of them are particularly useful in themselves nowadays. You actually have to be in a much more collective sense-making model. You have to be able to follow as well as lead. You have to leave your ego at the door. That hierarchy doesn't really work anymore. So you're trying to move them into stuff as what does that look like? So you go classically into here are the leadership styles, here are the contingency leadership models that are quite difficult to understand. This is how they apply today, and here's some extra styles that you need to understand. We throw in a bit of complexity science, we throw in the reason that bad behaviors happen, and so that you're beginning to try and negotiate this complexity from a leadership position. And then I would do stuff around sort of developmental psychology and how you get into these higher levels where you see you don't follow the rules of the system, but you see the system from outside. And then
Yep.
you also are aware of other systems, and you start rewriting the rules. How do I actually get information from other systems to make this better? And then you look at one of the things I'm really interested in is how do you look at the adaptive leadership? And this is really, I've got a bunch of experts in my organization who are being paid to be expert in their subject matter. And we're now dealing with a complex problem where expertise is no longer actually helpful. It's actually being leader.
It is.
And how do we get these experts to throw off the mantle of expertise and get involved in an adaptive, complex environment and contribute properly? And that's what I'm really interested in what that looks like.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because I actually just wrote a post on LinkedIn the other day about the Dunning-Kruger Club, and rule 1 of the Dunning-Kruger Club is you don't know you're in Dunning-Kruger Club, which is a lot of these things that you talk about with the executive, where they've got their mantle of expertise, and it makes them a man of expertise in everything, rather than actually going like, actually, you know what, I've just got a bit of expertise in this, and then when it comes to something that's not this, I can actually go, I don't know about this, or I'm not an expert in this. Maybe someone who's even at a lower level of hierarchy than me, they know more. And maybe I should be able to, at a higher level, shake off that ego of knowing everything and be able to ask someone at a lower level that's got more knowledge about something. But they just can't do it. It's really interesting.
And this is part of the classic leadership development challenge, because it's really based, most leadership development models are now based on ideas from the 60s and 70s. And
I agree.
They basically look at, there's one thing you do is you become the situational leadership model, which is basically, okay, I'm the expert, and how do I treat the people with less expertise than me? So if you go up through the stages, you sort of go from, right, I'm directing, and now I'm coaching, and now I'm supporting, and now I'm delegating. So expertise is built into the model, and lack of expertise means I just tell you what to do. There's no notion in that model of, right, none of us are experts, and what do we do with that? And then you have the transformational leadership model, which is the other one that sort of gets taught, and you could sort of transformational stroke authentic, because they're both the different sides of the same coin. And then the leader's the superhero. And then so either way, you've got models that no longer fit with the current reality. So you've got to move into something different, whilst still making people aware that these models exist. Because if they're not aware those models exist, they're not aware of how everybody else is expecting them to behave.
Yeah, and that's the both of those become, and you've sort of said it already, but it's become self-deprecating to a certain extent, because the superhero never gets the succession planning they need to transcend their own position, because they're constantly the center. And the expert, the second something happens in their team, they're stepping down into a role to do the expert work of the person that's moved on, or the person that's sick, or whatever, or things have got, I've seen this firsthand. Things have gotten really hard, or a client deadline has shifted, and the leader now has to take on the mantle and be the hero or whatever. And they're not leading anymore. They're doing grunt work because they're there, instead of going, well, no, I probably need to be a well-formed leader here. How do I delegate this problem? How do I build a complex system of different people? How do I bring in extra help rather than stepping into the expert role and doing it yourself and showing the world that
you're summing up the challenge. It's the embeddedness of these models in the development process, and also the popular press about what leadership should look like, and how do you escape from it? And that's the big problem, and that's what I try and deal with in my work, is escaping from the popular models.
Just listening.
I'm sure that this is just going to ring true for you too, Richard, but you get leadership development and in organizations, and then you go to the point where you go design a really advanced complex systems, vertical development, got all the, the new kind of really, and then it goes to a senior manager and they go, no, just keep it simple. And it's like, but you can't keep it, like, your environment is not simple. So your leadership capacities aren't simple capacities anymore. And you need to not be resting on your last 25 years of getting to where you are. It's an excuse.
I'm going to say yes and no. It depends on the client.
Oh.
So most clients Yes, that's exactly. So basically, what happens is that you'll have the whole initial talk with them, and they're really interested in creating, like we call it like mini leadership MBA kind of programs, and it's this coherent program where they get to do it all. And very often it's like, no, we just want seven modules that people can pick and choose from our learning system, and there's no coherence in it anymore. Yeah. But if we do get into a program where they say, like, we're going to actually do something serious, and we're going to do a coherent kind of, with coaching embedded and development. What we found when we've done that, and I have to be very careful not telling you the client names, but what we found when we've done that is quite often we'll be working in APAC, and it will be a global client, and then there will be European providers or American providers doing the leadership development elsewhere, and we will absolutely slaughter them in the feedback from the employees and the application of the ideas and their work. And these are often big business schools teaching traditional kind of, and they'll go, no, this is what works, because we're doing this kind of applied model. There are some clients that we've had that sort of go, wow, this is the future of leadership. How do we turn this into the global program rather than use these traditional providers that they've been using for 10, 15 years? And COVID has been a real help for us, because previously they would have just flown everyone. They would have flown the people from the UK out to go and deliver locally, and they'd have had a week-long workshop or something, a week-long strategy sessions, leadership sessions, etc. But they can't do that, and the Europeans wouldn't do it in Asia because they were asleep. So they had to go to other providers, and we would have never got a foot in the door until that started to happen. And now there's an awareness, wow, there's different stuff out there, and this is more useful. So that it's rare, but it does happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What
interesting.
I was left thinking in sort of some of the earlier parts of the conversation, but it carries through still here. You mentioned, we're carrying a lot of leadership from the 60s and the 80s and a lot of these concepts. What role, I don't know exactly how to formulate this question, so give me a chance to have a couple of goes maybe, but what role does agency play, or the changing theme of agency through work? So I feel like agency at work in the 60s is very different to what it was in the 80s. Very, very, very different to what it is post-COVID. Like, what role has agency played in the demands on leadership?
Okay, so this is probably about a 4-stage answer, and we'll come back.
Fire away. This is why we've got a podcast.
We'll come back to the actual agency need, because I think this is quite recent, the current demand, a gentle demand. So I'm going to go back into why I think there's a problem with leadership and culture, and then we can go into the personalized
fire away
stuff.
Go for it.
So what we're looking at, we're going right back here to Kurt Lewine's work in the 1930s. I don't know if you've read any, or Kurt Lewin, most people would pronounce it, but his German pronunciation is something. And he if you ever talk about leadership styles, that's his work. Okay, it's the foundational work on leadership styles. And of course, the 3 classic leadership styles are autocratic or directive, democratic or participative, and laissez-faire or delegative. Okay, they're the 3 classic styles that you're going to, and it's one of the few leadership experiments ever done. So he didn't just theorize it. He actually devised an experiment, and he practiced what was the response of the agents to these 3 different styles in experiential conditions. And what he was actually looking at was, and this is important, it was the aggressive behaviors when doing emergent work under the 3 different leadership styles. Okay. The context was emergent work, so it was people doing like craft work, collaborative craft work was what they were. They weren't skilled at it, but and they were like, right, are you going to build something that's useful? And then you'd be led in 3 different ways. So this it's only relevant to that context if it's emergent work, and of course a lot of what we're talking about is emergent work. So it's becoming more commonplace. So you go, right, okay, first of all, laissez-faire, which they invented. It didn't exist as a term, and they actually said, well, this style is sort of different. What is it? What's going on? So if you've got a delegative or laissez-faire leadership style, you have high levels of aggression in every agent underneath it. Okay, so you've got this aggressive, this ongoing aggressive atmosphere with people fighting each other and disagreeing with each other and just generally being toxic. Doesn't matter whether the leader is in the room or out of the room, the toxicity stays the same, because there's no psychological tension going on when the leader's there, because he's just laissez-faire anyway. So let's just carry on. Okay, so you've got that high level of toxicity. If you've got an autocratic leader, you've then got sort of apathy and submissive behaviours when the leader is in the room. And when the leader leaves, you've got outbreaks of bullying and scapegoating. So you've got these sudden eruptions, and it's blaming somebody that it's your fault. So you're stopping everything, it's your fault, and you get this kind of scapegoating effect. And then if you get the democratic and participative stuff, you just sort of tend to get good quality work. And so the way we're looking at this today is, okay, the emergent work is the current condition. So this is becoming more and more relevant. And because there are very few experiments, we have to go back to the foundational work. And we have, if you look at culture and management today, culture is a laissez-faire normative control mechanism. Okay, so you basically have your values and you have your behavior. If you're sophisticated, those values will be broken into behaviors, and you go, right, okay, just internalize these behaviors and values and live that way. There's no control other than the laissez-faire internalization. So therefore, if the work is emergent, what you should be seeing is higher and higher levels of general toxicity in the organization. And then you've got management being trained, and the management tends to be trained and promoted because of their ability, technical ability, not the human ability. And they think that work looks like directive kind of planning and controlling and decision making over the team. And so therefore you're going to get apathy and passivity in the team with these outbreaks of bad behavior, etc. Right at the top of the organization, most leadership teams tend to still be a little bit participative. So they're separated from the body of the organization, doing participative democratic kind of, oh, this is really interesting, oh, let's do this strategy, and they're all talking together and getting that kind of model. But none of the rest of the organization is doing that. So the head and the body is separated. And the head feels everything's going well, and the body is this toxic mess where everybody's getting ill. That's the way that I look at the experiential research in terms of contemporary conditions, where you've still got this fetishization of leadership, the fetishization of culture, engagement models and experience models underneath, where people are, and risk models where people aren't really telling the truth, classic management models interfering with all of this, and then emergent work in complex systems going on all the time. And I haven't met anyone yet when I describe that behavioral environment, you don't go, yeah, I see that all the time.
Yep.
Yeah, and
well, and you do. We see it all the time as well. So yeah, it's definitely something that front and center. I think that's when you were talking, we were just smiling, because we've definitely had the privilege of witnessing exactly those behaviors that, literally exactly as you've described them. So yeah, I think.
So then the agency thing there, it's right. And the agency, and this is why I think the agency is very emergent as well, because we've all had globally 2 years of experience of very different organizational conditions. Okay. And part of those organizational conditions, especially at the beginning, was a greater degree of agency in how we did the work. Okay, because we suddenly dislocated from organizational systems that are no longer controlling how we work. And we're like, oh, you know what, I'm much more productive now. I've got a bit more control of my time. And so if you look at the classic work from home research, which pre-existed COVID, there's 3 things that you need to be doing in order to work from home well. And the work from home, the first one is focus. Can I create a space where I'm totally focused and I'm not being distracted by electronic information or other people? Do I have flexibility in terms of the technologies that I can use and the media that I have access to? So can I actually use the stuff that seems relevant to me to do the work? And also, do I have the freedom to manage my time and to do all of the things that, if I can go take my dog for a walk, or I can go and spend an hour talking to my neighbours or whatever. And if those 3 conditions are in place, higher productivity, higher levels of engagement, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of agency in that. and people don't want to give that up by going back into these toxic environments where you've got this kind of systemic control of behavior. What organizations need to do is if they are pulling people back into the office, is create environments in which collective agency becomes possible. And so then you've got, actually the chatting of people in over breaking bread and stuff like that, plus collaborative environments where you're actually doing proper collaborative work. And by proper collaborative work, I don't mean putting 25 people in a room and everyone puts their computer screens up and starts tapping away. It's like, okay, get rid of the tech. All the tech can be at home. When you're in the office, collaborative work is going to be low tech or no tech. And so you can design around that. So that's sort of what I'm looking at in terms of a sort of collective agency model versus an individual agency model. And people do not want to give up that increased agency they've experienced over the last couple of years.
Oh, without a doubt, it's something we're seeing. I mean, we're recording this at the start of 2022, and there's half of the world's talking about the new normal and stay at home. We're going to figure this out, and the other half of the world's going, get back to the office. Everyone get back in. We're going to make this work in the city. We need to have everyone working together side by side, or however they're pitching it. We're at loggerheads with ourselves culturally to go, what is the natural expectation? And for those I've spoken to, single person perspective here, but nonetheless, anecdotally, those who are being forced to go back to the office, I'd say 8 out of 10 are kind of begrudging going back to the office. There's 2 out of 10 that are like, I am so ready to not be at home anymore. I need people in my life.
Yeah, and you're going to see variations at and so this is where the personalized kind of agency comes in. You're going to see variations at the personalized level. Yeah, but this is where I think work needs to go. Is how do you create a hyper personalized kind of working experience? Yeah, where you've got those who want to stay at home more regularly can stay at home more regularly, and those who want to come to the office can come into the office, and you're beginning to hyper personalize it. So within the sort of demands that you've still got to do 2 types of work well, the collective and the individual.
Yes.
Okay. Because you can't just go, right, I'm just going to do individual work and I'm never going to be part of the collective because I don't like coming in. Yeah. But you can't also be, I'm only ever going to do collective work and I'm never going to sit down in front of my computer and do. So you've got those kind of things that you're balancing. And then you've got the hyper personalized kind of, well, how am I going to do this? And I think we're at the early stages of thinking about this at the moment. But when they're pulling people back into the offices, so I think that's a different challenge. I think this is because the leaders don't feel special in the digitalized world anymore.
I agree. I tend to think, and I can't remember whose podcast it might have been. It might have been the Brave New Work or Aaron Dignan's podcast, I think, where he was talking about that, just basically saying it's, a lot of the show and the expression that leaders have is being able to hold court in meetings and do all those kinds of things, and that's half of their work almost, and that evaporated overnight to a certain extent. So they're now sitting around twiddling their thumbs going, well, what is now the work that I do if I can't hold court and I can't do these things that I've done for majority of my working life? People are off individually powered with their own agency, and they can book meetings and work together whenever they want, and I don't get to corral everyone in and get everyone listen to what I have to say anymore.
Yeah, and that's sort of the challenge for leaders is that they were suddenly a little tiny box on a computer screen, rather than all the status symbols around them, and they've got the big chair at the end of the board table and all of this kind of stuff, and they're like, and you can sort of say they've worked really hard to get there, so they sort of go, well, I deserve this. This is, I've been at the other end of this table and I've had to take it. Now it's my turn to sit at the top, and I deserve it. But the world has changed, and so that it's about how do these leaders reimagine leadership when that sitting at the head of a board table is no longer enough, and the status symbols that they've sort of gathered is not actually doing anything. Nobody cares anymore. So the leaders are trying to call people back into the office because of that kind of I deserve this almost, and I feel like I'm not in control of the organization.
Yeah,
which was always mythical, but they felt
exactly
there that they were.
totally. And some of it is that autocratic leader wanting that control back. But I find it really interesting. One of the things that stuck with me is I could probably only count half a dozen of them that I've witnessed and spoken to, but they definitely exist, and they would exist at largely every company, is the leaders that really invested in trying to be a new type of leader and have done the work to develop situational awareness, emotional intelligence, have worked on body language and presence, and are the kind of people who are completely aware of every moving piece in an office and can scan the room and see the different moving parts and can understand what's happening, and then can walk in a room and have a presence. And like you said, can kind of command an audience and have that moment. That's the theater of management, so to speak. And they've been a master of that theater of management. That's not autocratic leadership per se. They're not driving home that kind of, let's do it this way. They've become quite nuanced and clever. All of a sudden, like you said, they're a square on a screen, and they can't survey anymore. They can't see the moving pieces. So all the secret sauce that they've developed over a career, all of a sudden vaporized overnight, and they've gone
trapped in their box.
Trapped in the box, and they're left going, look, I don't want to be one of these assholes that gets everyone back to work. But to be quite frank, I can't do my job, because my job is to scan and survey and have a presence and be visible. And the best I can do is literally just crash into people's Teams meetings and say, hi, how you going? I'm going to watch you. And they'll sit there and silently observe the conversation on a Zoom, but it's not the same.
I think there are mechanisms to solve that digitally, but nobody. It requires a massive reimagination of what these kind of collaborations look like, and I haven't seen many people go down that pathway yet.
Yeah,
no.
Even something as simple as just doing rounds, where you give each individual a minute to talk rather than leave digital open space for the most extroverted person to swallow up all the air, and just simple structures like, well, no, you have a minute, so really think about what you're going to say, because that's all you've got before we move on. And that person's got a minute. And whether you structure it with the extroverts going first because they can think on their feet, and the other introverted people need a little bit more time to put it all together, at least everyone gets that sort of democratic space of just a minute to say what they need to say, where, but people don't do that. Like I don't know how many, I couldn't even imagine how many virtual meetings I've had in the last 2 years, and I've never seen rounds done once.
Yeah, so that's certainly something that needs to be done. We work on Price's Law. Are you aware of Price's Law? No. So the square root of the total number of people in the meeting do half the work. Okay, so if you've got a meeting of 25 people, and this will resonate. So if you've got a meeting of 25 people on the screen, 5 people will do half the talking, and the other 20 will do the other half of the talking between them. Okay, so the bigger the meeting, the worse the ratio becomes.
Yes.
So what you're trying to do, what we always try and do is, okay, what's the best number of people? Well, it's 4, because the square root of 4 is 2. So if 2 is doing half the work, then the other 2 are doing half the work. So everyone's and so what you're looking at doing is, if you're ever having big meetings, you're looking at breaking that, and the technology is there to do it. You're looking at breaking them out into small groups of 4, where they can all explore different concepts. And then you're in the bounded rationality space where bias gets solved, because if you say you've got 24, so you've got 6 teams of 4, all exploring the concept, they're all going to come up with different possible solutions, because each team is biased, and their interpretation of reality is located within that team and their experience. And then you can go back to the main one, and everybody can be sharing this kind of their thinking. And the more opportunity, the more of these possible interpretations you get, even though most of them are going to be wrong or flawed or partial, the greater chance you're going to make the right decision. And that's the kind of stuff that you can play around with. And what you can really do, if you're playing around with it well, is make sure that you've got an incredibly multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary kind of team, and you're including them in the process by putting them in an environment where it's not scary to voice anything.
Yeah.
And then you're bringing them back again. So that it's very possible to do. And then you just need your sort of magnetic leader Well, they can be the facilitator of the overall and sort of, pull out questions and oh, that's really interesting. Can you go into when you're back in the plenary sessions? And so there's so much possibility in the technology, but what you need is leaders trained. And one of the things we're trying to work on at the moment is train leaders how to use TikTok.
Yep.
Because their digital literacy is so bad that they're unable to do that magnetic kind of sense making that you're talking about, which is incredibly valuable. But they could still do it with a bit more digital literacy, and then suddenly all the problems seep away because you can go, wow, we can do the collective stuff digitally across the globe better or close to as well as we can do it actually face to face. But it's the methodology that's lacking.
And it's interesting that you say that, because you even see the expertise turn up in the tools and the technology, right? It's like you'll suggest a platform and they will be like, that thing's crap and it's terrible, until you teach them how to use it and they become somewhat expertise in it. And then, it's magnificent. It's fantastic. So you even get the expertise and that mindset of that heroic kind of autocratic control come in even into the selection of tools. It's unless it's Microsoft PowerPoint that we've been using for 70 years. I'm not interested
not
in
that
it.
bad.
But I think all you need is video tech and a chat box, and you can do all of this. That's all you need.
Yep.
It's just the use of the tool. Anything else is just. And I've used things like Miro and Mural and this kind of stuff, and it just adds complexity to the overall discussion and things. So you don't. It's quite fun to use, and you can use it for the right tasks. But ultimately, all you need is what we've always needed: is are we talking to each other and are we taking notes? If we are, then guess what? We can come up with some interesting solutions.
Yeah. One of the reasons I ask about agency, and it's one of those things that I think is probably more of an observation that I'm busy trying to solve at the moment more than anything else, is particularly in those democratic environments, and particularly now where we've got such an enormous focus on inclusion and making sure that that people are being heard and that we're giving people a chance to have a say. You run the risk, and forgive me because I come from an arts and comms background. So this plays out significantly in that space. It may not necessarily in other spaces, but if you just take the law of averages and you just take everyone's concepts and ideas and average them and say, well, we're going to develop good work, you immediately, it's safe to assume you cancel the brilliance, right? And so if you take that model into an ad agency, you produce almost no good ads, like ever, right? And so I'm left thinking about, and maybe the answer is your 2 pizza teams. It's the 4 people in the team and all the rest of it. But when we think about agency and teams and democratization of work and leadership structures and how we're dealing with emergent work and all the rest of it, how do we create a space for the brilliance while leading democratized teams? Because you're right, it gets the best performance, but how do we also get
2 ways of doing it? I think, and so I've worked with both of these ways, and so one of them is my radical extra step in design thinking, which I've never seen anyone else but me do.
Oh, I'm listening.
But this is so you go. What my challenge with design thinking is, right? It's a useful methodology to sort of get the empathy and all of the kind of stuff going on. But what you always get a consensus result. Always. I've never seen, and the first design thinking workshop I attended, before I knew how to do it myself, everyone came up with the same idea. It doesn't matter which table it was like. This is totally useless, because if everyone comes up with the same idea, it's not.
Why did we do it in the first place?
Why are we doing it in the first place?
Yep.
So what I do, so you go through the early stages, and then you get these opportunities to vote on other people's ideas. Okay, so you'll have a two, and this bit I've seen other people do. So this is not me. You've got you'll have an idea in your hand. And you'll compare it with somebody else's idea, and you'll give it a score out of 9, the comparison. So one could score 9, the other one could score 0, or one could score 5, the other one could score based on how good an idea you think it is. You're ranking the ideas one above the other. And then what they do at the end, what I've seen in the other people doing this, is they just collect the 6 ideas with the highest score. And I said, no, okay, you actually need to collect the ideas with the biggest range of marks. So when some people, you've got 5 or 6 people giving it an 8 and a 9, and 5 or 6 people giving it a 0 or a 1, that's your sweet spot idea.
Polarization.
Half the people understand it and thinks it's amazing, and the other half don't get it. Because that's the idea that not everyone's going to have, and that's the likelihood that that's the key one. And that's all I do is like collect the ones with the
biggest range.
Widest
that's
range.
A fantastic insight. That's great.
So that's the first thing. So that's the design thinking. The other way of doing it, which I think is even more effective, and we've already gone into the sort of notion of small teams, right? So here's a problem situation. So we're going to extract the problem, and then we're going to try and solve the problem. So you go through that as a plenary, and you can do it in all kinds of ways. But then when you've got the small teams, you can have teams of 3 or 4. That would be the best number for me. And you're trying to do some co-creative work, and there's a bunch of techniques. But you're ending up with either everybody or every team coming up with an idea. And so say you've got 10 teams, you've got 10 ideas. And then you have to do the safe to fail stuff. Okay. And that's when you're starting to present your ideas to other teams. Okay? And then you say, right, this is what we're going to do. And the other team's job, it's a bit like the Pixar method, where they show the first draft of a Pixar film to everyone and they tear it apart. So the other team's job is to tear apart your idea and illustrate where it is going to fail. So you've got teams present. So you've now got 5. You've got groups of two teams, so 5 groups of presenting each other's idea, and they go, oh, it's going to fail here, it's going to fail here, it's going to fail here. Okay, and then you go and rewrite how you're going to do it. And then you go and present to another team, and the same thing happens. And eventually, there are less and less ways that this idea can fail. And there are clues as to whether it's working, because you've got to say, here's the clues whether it's working, here's the clues at whether it's failing. If it fails, how do we stop it without it costing us too much money or time? And if it works, how do we add extra resources to it rapidly? Well, that's good, because you've got all these other teams with failing ideas. So and then you've got to get rid of the ownership. You've got to try and create a co-creation model. And that's where this is where the teams talking to each other happens, because they all feel they've contributed to each other's ideas rather than my idea is the best one. And then you get to a point, and the standard thing is, right, 2 of these things seem to be working. A couple of them back burner just in case. And then 6 are just patently not going to work. So we suddenly can throw resources of people into the ideas that have worked. So that's what I would prefer to do. And I think in a day, you can go from problem situation to here are 10 action plans that we're going to follow tomorrow with all the clues set in place. And then we can meet up again in a couple of weeks to look at the clues and to which ones we're going to go to. I don't think it takes very long at all.
No. I think the secret sauce in that is actually the resilience in the face of critique. Like, there's the old story about Airbnb during their Y Combinator accelerator running out of ideas during their growth hacking, and they would got to find ways, and they're just trying like idea after idea, day after day after day, and they're running thin. And then one of them decides that they've found a backdoor through the API into Craigslist, and that exploded how people found Airbnb, and they could find an uptick in adoption. And it's actually like in the science of ideas, running out of ideas is part of the process of actually getting, because it drops your inhibitions and you start to go, look, we've just run out of ideas. So just chuck that one in. And all of a sudden people start building on top of that, and you've got the ability to flesh it out. But if you haven't, to your point, if you haven't torn down the idea and asked someone to reconstruct it with new constraints and then done that again a couple more times, then you're not in a position to drop that inhibition and say, actually, what if we just tried this? What if we did it this way? What if we thought about it inside out? Those kind of things get the ideas to the right point and give, like you said, give the co-ownership as well in the process, because no one person's being the hero either.
Yeah, so the more you can do that, and there's a bunch of techniques to get, and so the whole process is full of energy and laughter.
Yeah.
Even when people are tearing down your ideas, you can do things. You get right. Okay, when they're tearing down your ideas, you have to turn your back from them so that they can't see your faces. And people find that funny, but then they can take notes because they're not looking. There's all kinds of things that you do. The challenge always is to do the work, because people people don't understand why that works. So trying to get somebody to bring you in, and then you get people who are so resistant at the beginning. So you've got to do some storytelling and some model, just some interesting modeling at the beginning to get them on board, and then once you've warmed them up, then you can sort of go. But selling it to sort of very traditionalist organizations who think a meeting is again computer screens up around a table is incredibly difficult to do, and that's one of the biggest challenges. So you look at the digitalized world, and then you look at all they've done is create the exact same meeting structures that they had in the office, and they've imposed them or injected them into the digitalized environment, and it's just, and the digitalized environments. I'm a big fan of kind of Mary Aitken's cyber effect work, where she basically says the cyber effect both makes the good seem better and the bad seem worse.
Bad seem worse.
So you're getting the amplification of all the bad. And that's leading to sort of burnout and boredom and apathy and etc. Because these meetings are autocratically run generally. Here's the agenda, I'm in charge, and you're just seeing this amplification of all of the bad. But if you put in a good meeting structure, you get the amplification of all the good when it happens online as well.
Totally.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. And there's so much to be gained from, like, even the littlest, tiniest things of even just efficiency as a leader. It's saying, like, I'm going to document this online, and so that the notes I can get goes straight into a collaborative spreadsheet or straight into a collaborative whiteboard or whatever, so that you're not then handing this thing you've just done to your assistant to say, go write these notes up so that we can share it with the rest of the team. It's like the minutes are instantly available to everyone who is a part of it, and they can immediately go away and think about it. It's little tiny efficiencies like that. Like you said, it amplifies the good. Yes, it does amplify the bad.
So
too,
in terms of the learning, kind of, I go right back to my initial sort of job of teaching and education and stuff. So in terms of the learning models, what you're trying to do is create as active passive learning. So you're getting people with expertise telling you stuff, and then you're discussing the expertise, and then you're group discussing it, and then you're going back into another expert giving you their perspective. So that's the active passive. So if you have passive but no active, you don't really learn very much, because you get bored because you're listening for 2 hours. And if you have active with no passive, you go off in radical, strange directions. You're not grounded. And then what you just mentioned is you go off and you think about it. Well, this is sort of percolation, where the actual really good idea might pop into your head on your Friday morning shower, where it's all percolating in your head, and you're sort of going, and it's like a coffee percolation. It's just like, oh wow, now it's ready, and you don't know when it's going to pop in. And this is where work. This is how work should spread into the rest of your life. It shouldn't be spreading into the rest of your life because the technology is blurring the work-life boundary. But there will be moments in the rest of your life where you're just doing things you need to do or you're enjoying, like a walk in the country, and suddenly your brain is like, and you go, oh wow, I should do that. And it can happen anywhere. And that's where the work-life boundary should be blurred. But what's actually happening is it's all the tech that's preventing us from living actually a meaningful home life. It's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
So what you're trying to tell us, if we want to have a really effective leadership retreat, we should just have group showers. That's because that's where
wasn't that Ally McBeal and the
you are right, though. A lot of it does come in those places where we're disconnected from the actual content and context, and just like you said, it's percolated for a while and just pops up to the surface.
I'm a big fan of the interleaving of stuff as well. So rather than a linear learning model where you just go, right, here's the beginning and then we're going to take you to the end, is you just throw stuff at people. and let them put it together in their head in a way that makes sense to them. And that's suddenly when you get amazing interpretations that you would never have, because if you're taking it down the linear pathway, their interpretations are likely to be the same as yours. But if you're throwing at them in all kinds of order and they come up with a different interpretation than you would ever get, and you go, wow, okay, we'll do that then. So
it's interesting. I'm doing a piece of work at the moment, and that we're just sending out stuff to some leaders to say, go and have a conversation with your manager and bring out a topic that's core to the business and core to yourself that you've got the ability to have some influence over. And we're going to apply our content to that so that you've got some contextual application for it. And it's just interesting to see that, in a program that talks about complexity and uncertainty and how do we manage that and how do we manage VUCA, that, the senior managers want like a bullet, like what we talked about earlier. It's like a bullet point kind of reference to why they need the business challenge. And that's not, you're removing the uncertainty from the challenge by being too over prescriptive from the start. The whole point of it, if you're not going to teach them any new, why go there at all in the end?
Yeah, and I think, so what I experience, if you're doing the same thing, you probably experience the same thing. Whenever you teach something that has a bit of tension in it, this is not easy. You will lose some students because they're not ready for it, and that's fine. They might be ready for it in 2 years' time. But what you will do is you'll find the people who are craving it, and you go, right, well, give them the work, because they're the ones who are they're grabbing the tension and saying, oh my God, this is what I've been absolutely wanting in development programs for years. And now I've got the chance to wrestle with it. And you've got people who aren't. And guess what? That tells you who's ready for your next leadership position and helps you do some career planning. And then the ones who aren't, you go, well, okay, maybe it's possible that in 2 years' time you will be, and we can build you up, or it's possible that you've reached a level and promoting you would be a problem. That kind of stuff is I think necessary, and it's really difficult to teach high tension learning because people want edutainment.
Yes.
Edutainment. That's right. Leadership, entertainment.
and on that, let's just talk for a second about what this changes in terms of the expectations on leaders. Like one of the things that's bringing to mind is actually a piece of work I did with a school, and they were bringing in a new approach to education. And you think of it, what's made me think about it is think about that linear path of leadership and how people might peel off in various directions. And we've had a linear path of education for a very, very long time. And we know that the different learning dispositions either work with that well or don't work with that very well. And so we're coming up with new ways of education, particularly at the junior school and early learning space at the moment, but eventually it will make its way up through each. And this was a scholar out of Oxford was talking about how really clinically speaking, not clinically, what am I talking about? The research work that they've done has identified that the most effective way to break open that whole, the whole path of education to be more inclusive of different learning styles and to be more effective with any learning style has been the concept of what they call sustained shared thinking. And they talk about sustained shared thinking as though it's similar to servant leadership, but probably more expanded and more of a principles-based thing, is to say, instead of saying you should learn this, let's ask a bunch of really active questions and then be passive and watch them learn. And so you're in there and you're sharing the thinking and you're understanding what they're trying to achieve and you're asking loaded questions to get them to go towards a certain point. And we see that in good leaders know how to do that in a work environment or whatever. The other thing that this particular piece of research found out is it's one of the hardest things for a human being to do for a long period of time. Like to ask a teacher to sustain shared thinking for a 6-hour day is almost impossible. Some people in the test could do it for 3 to 4 hours and then they'd be spent. Other teachers could do it for 9 minutes and then they'd be done for the day.
Yeah.
Right. What is like that for me was a big aha moment. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, the fabric for teaching is changing. The kind of people it's expecting of itself is changing. Is that the same case for leaders?
Well, you're going down a really interesting path here. So what you're going down is one of the pathways of what the future of work looks like, which is everything we do is meaningful all the time. So there's the shared learning, the teaching of shared learning, and this kind of, so all of our work is totally meaningful, and anything that's routine is going to be automated away. So AIs and bots and things, and then all we do is do meaningful work. Well, you've just described what meaningful work all the time looks like.
Yeah, it's exhausting.
It's exhausting. Okay, you imagine a call center worker where all of the basic questions are now being dealt with by bots, and every call they have is a high trauma call, and you've got to do that for 8 hours straight. You imagine what that's going to do mentally and physically and physiologically to that person. It's going to be hell. So we haven't thought that through. Now, I think there are ways in which you could do the shared learning with the teaching, but we need to be really clear as to what that, and almost you're pulling the teacher. I mean, I'll just talk about my own facilitation.
Yeah, go.
I did one as a school as well, and we were doing the future strategy of the school. And I didn't do. I got the storytelling done at the beginning, which was done by the teachers and the principals, and they got student stories, and then they were, some of them, they did it incredibly well. I didn't really help them just that much. I said, I want stories about this and stories about that, and they. I mean, I felt that having had nothing to do with the school until this moment, I felt proud of their achievements, because it's like, wow, but also the pain at where they'd failed. I mean, it was a really emotional experience, even for someone who hadn't been part of it. So you got that kind of deep engagement. I did a 20-minute presentation on contemporary models of change and strategic change, and then we presented this is the new strategy, so that they were sort of got to the 5 things that they were, the 5 pathways they were trying to deal with, and then I just gave them the shared learning tasks to do. And all I did was walk around. I did like 20,000 steps walking around this and I barely had to say another thing, because once you get them involved, and then you pull them out and go, right, okay, this is stage 1. Then you quieten them all and go, right, this is what you're doing next. And they all go off and do it, and then they come back, and then you go, right, this is what you're doing now. And I, literally, I did a lot of walking, which was good for my weight, but I didn't do I didn't do more than about 25-30 minutes of speaking in sort of a 3-hour workshop, and then we ended up with all of these kind of action plans and ideas and stuff. So I think it's about the teacher no longer, again, it's the same as leaders, it's you're no longer in control. And actually a lot of it is becoming more passive and allowing the kind of energetic complexity emerge, seeing the patterns where you need to intervene where they don't really understand what they're doing, but other than that, just trust the emergence, and then be able to, and you can just sit and not keep the exercise and not use the brain, but then when you go and inject yourself back in, then you've got to be ready to go again. And that's really what contemporary work looks like. I don't know if you've read Deep Work by Cal Newport. He basically says like that high complex work, sort of 4 or 5 hours. Most days you can only do 4, and maybe do 5 hours, and unless you get into the state of flow, which is you can't prepare for and you can't plan, and you're sort of burnt out after that, and you've got to go and do something else. So the way, and this is the way I plan my own day, I sort of tend to wake up about 6:30. We'll just catch up on the morning news from 6:30 to 7:30, and then work pretty much from 7 till 11 without a break, just with coffee and tea and teas and things. And then after that, I know that it's going to be pretty unlikely that I can sit and do heavy focus work. And so then I'll do meetings, and I might go for a walk. I might, there's a whole bunch of, and I'll do the admin-y kind of stuff in the afternoon. And then, that kind of works, I think, scientifically, and it definitely works for me. So it's around how do you manage what the science says about our brains and our energy levels, and collaborative kind of activities and things like that in a way that allows you to really add value without burning out. And that's key.
I find it really interesting that you describe that, because it's almost almost the same practice I've got, but what I've found has been really interesting is I've got a client in the US. And so having to get up and start those conversations at 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, and then drop it, context switch, and move to deep work means that the interruption's already happened. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then you don't get that deep work, or you certainly don't get the flow state you've been looking for. And then you get to lunchtime and you're just as fried. And all of a sudden, without having, like you said, most efficient would be to spend, at least for me as well, would be to spend that first couple of hours, few hours, with a cup of coffee and just smash out the work, and then move all the meetings to the other side. It's an energy modulation conversation to then go, I can't do this in certain circumstances because I have to take calls, or I have to context switch 3 times before 10 o'clock, or whatever it might be. I need to watch my energy, or I will burn out as well.
Yeah, I think you're looking at the overall complexity of the day, and this is when you need to go beyond the current way of thinking about work. Is that there are days where you can't do what you need to do in the way that you want to do it, and you've got to look at, well, where's the value I'm creating today? Where's the value I'm creating? You know, if I have to do this 4 hours of stuff with the States, you know, my day might be then 4 hours of stuff with the States, a few hours break, and then doing some extra work in the afternoon. But for me, and this is where the extended intelligence lies. For me, you've also got to understand the science around how you might keep yourself well, around living a sort of a meaningful, cognitively powerful day. And that means understanding nutrition, that means understanding exercise, that means understanding self roles and context switches. And there's a whole bunch of things that are barely ever taught in any kind of leadership or management education.
Totally. But and you're absolutely right. Like, had I been taught early about energy modulation and context switching and storytelling and I mean, everything we've talked about in leadership or management education, you would have jumped in it with totally different feet and formed early habits with a totally different worldview. And a lot of leaders now are having to unlearn a whole bunch of bad habits with the new way of working, that because they're having to learn almost by osmosis that you actually have to watch how often you spend with one particular activity or another, or you really should take an hour and a half and go for a walk with the dog. Like, you actually need it, you know? So
I will become even more radical, because I think that the current model, so authentic leadership would be the trendiest kind of model of leadership, where it's like look deep inside yourself and find your true values and things. And then you've got the sort of the same kind of thing about authenticity and the psychological kind of realm. I don't think they're wrong. I think they're dangerously wrong. Because I don't think the notion, first of all, I don't think there's a notion of a single self that doesn't play multiple roles in very different contexts and very different ways. And even thinking there is causes division. So the way that thinking there is, so first of all, trying to do it yourself causes you deep harm, because you're unable to play the roles according to the context, because you're like, no, I'm always like this. Well, you can't always be like that, because you've got to play different social roles. And the second challenge is then when you look at somebody else through the psychometric lens, or the traits and the types and that kind of stuff. So DISC is a perfect example. And you sort of go, oh, they're a red and they're a blue. What you're doing is you're looking at their behaviors out of context. Oh, they're behaving like this because they're a red. You're just looking at their type and trait. But when you look at your own behavior, you go, well, I'm behaving like this because of this contextual situation. And so you've got a gap between understanding your own behavior and everything that the psychologists and the behavioral stuff within organizational science and development tells you. And that is deeply problematic, because it's creating division, while, again, it's a system of harm dressed up as a system of health. It's creating division whilst ostensibly teaching you how to understand self and others, and it's got to go. It's no longer fit for purpose. And I would say the same thing for culture. It's just not fit for purpose in these networked world where we're all, we're just playing different roles the whole time, and we're embedded in different systems, and we have to play, and anyone who's watched some of these modern films where like Avatar, you've got the person who's not in the avatar and the person who is the avatar. Ready Player One, where they go into the virtual world, and they're living completely different virtual lives in completely different environments than they live in their real world. And you're like, right, you've got to be aware that's not just a metaphor. That's what human existence looks like. It's not that you're in a virtual world playing a virtual avatar, but as you move from the work roles you play to the social roles, it's a different version of you. It's not that there's one authentic version that always needs to be the same. And if you think there is, it's going to start causing you harm. It's about you have an understanding of who you want to be and who you want to become, which is sort of authenticity. And you can, each of the roles, you can join with that understanding of self and say, right, how much of the person I want to be fits with this role? And how much do I have to follow social expectations? And you're playing and melding. And so when you talked about organizational theatre, that's what it is. How much of self do you put into the role? And how much don't you? And when is it harmful and when isn't it harmful? And all of these kind of things need to be going on.
One of the things we've lost in the last 2 years is the ceremony of donning that suit and taking it off. So going to work, the commute, whether you're walking to work and it's only 2 minutes, or whether you've got an hour and a half drive ahead of you, or you're going to spend 2 hours on a train, or whatever it might be, the actual commute of work is putting on that avatar, and then the commute home is taking it off. The new world of work now is I open my spare bedroom door and I'm out the door and I'm back at home. And the whiplash of that change and not having the ceremony to actually take off that avatar is probably, my assumption would be, it's having a part to play there for sure.
I think it's deeply problematic, this lack of context switching, and it's so you've got the context switching between the work role and the home role with the commute, which now is literally closing the door. And you probably heard my wife talk suddenly in the middle of this. We're in that kind of situation at the moment, so I don't have total control of my environment. So you've got that problem with the lack of adopting new roles. You've got and what happens with Zoom calls? Lots of people are just having back-to-back Zoom calls. So there's not even time to decompress from one Zoom call and determine what role you need to play in the next Zoom call. And then you've got your partner going, I don't actually like the work you very much. I thought I was married to somebody completely different. So you're looking at that kind of, and then you go, you need to be aware that these are different roles, and you've got to separate self from role. And the more you do, and this is a protective device that sadly, dominant psychological theory is not allowing us to access.
And I wonder if this is part of that, like precipitating that change away from the 8-hour workday and all the rest of it is moving. I mean, you've got all those examples of the accounting company and whatnot gone to 4-day work weeks and 3-day weekends and had productivity uplifts, and certain industries are going to be better at it than others. But I can see where, based on this conversation, you can kind of run time forward and go, well, as situations become more complex and as teams become more complex and more hybridized and whatnot, it becomes more exhausting. And as we learn better tools to modulate our energy in that environment, we're going to start to fight for our time back. And that time back, I think this is where the future of technology could work.
So there's the current. So what you're going to have potentially is wearable tech that says, you know what, you've just been doing 3 hours of cognitively challenging work. I can tell because I'm monitoring your body. It's time to go and do something else.
Yes.
Or you've just been in a meeting where your blood pressure's shot through the roof. Go and take a walk to calm down. So you're going to, and organizations are going to have to be aware of this, because once this tech is out there, they're going to be sued to high heaven for causing harm. If you're wearing it and you've got control and you go, look, I've just been in this with this manager that you make me sit and have a 2-hour meeting with every day. And every time it happens, my blood pressure goes up and my resting heart rate goes up and cortisol's flooding through my body. We've got to do something like this because the data is very clear. It's being caused by the organization. So here you've got where technology is going to be properly integrated into managing this. The other challenges, I think, where all of us are doing work is the awareness of what this looks like in terms of how many hours of cognitively complex work you can do per day in an individual and the collective environment. And then really for me, it's moving into that extended environment where, okay, well, part of this is where do I go and learn interesting stuff that I can bring in from different realms? I mean, I've just been reading a book on cholesterol, which has taught me stuff around what's the biggest cause of heart attacks in the world. It's the forcible repatriation of people. So you restructure their world so there's no sense of belongingness. So Aboriginal Australians have the worst heart attack rate in the world because of this. But you just apply that to organizations.
Yeah.
So ongoing restructured transformations where you have no co-creation in it and it's impacting your life. Well, what is that likely to cause? Much higher levels of heart problems, a few heart attacks, etc. If you've got a piece of technology that goes, you know what, I can see this happening to me, then the only answer is going to be co-creation because you've got an ability to control your environment and maintain that belongingness. So there's some really interesting stuff by going beyond business books, most of which are terrible. So going beyond these books and finding insights from other models and other ways of exploring and explaining the world that you can bring in to the businesses and say, right, this is stuff that's going to give you an advantage by knowing this. The challenge is you've got people who've just been taught traditional MBAs and the functional stuff who are not ready to hear this stuff. And the business schools that don't teach it, because it's not, none of the business school teachers will be learning this stuff because they're locked into their silos.
Yes.
So then that's where I think the future work needs to be done. And I think, I think once we get this wearable tech that can do it, that opens the doorway into, well, we've really got to reimagine this because we cannot be seen to be killing our staff.
Yeah.
No.
And beyond that as well, the second we actually have the ability to measure it, is it not negligence then to have not done anything about it?
Well, I think what you're going to have is you're going to have the employees owning the data. So what you don't want is a world where the organization has access to all of that data, but the employees then choosing to share it and saying, look, I was in this meeting from 12 till 4 and look at what happened to me. Okay?
That's right.
So, and if then you get, maybe if it's just one employee, but if it's everyone in that meeting goes, cortisol was up, blood pressure was up, et cetera, that's a moment of harm. And then you've got the data then to go, well, what was going on in the meeting? What was causing it? How do we stop that happening again? And of course, then you've also got what really needs to happen is saying, well, if that kind of meeting is causing everybody harm all the way through it, how much value did it create?
Yeah.
I mean, precisely zero. It probably stripped value because none of them are able to go and do more work now because they're absolutely spent. And so it's actually stripping value from the organization. And then that's where I would like to see technological development going, because you're able then to sort of to do the kind of stuff that I think we're all trying to do, but you've got the data saying, look, this is what you're causing.
Yeah.
No, I agree. So we're at an hour 20, so we're about 15 minutes over our usual length, but the conversation's been so good that I thought we'd hang with it. But coming to the end, what do you think are the 3 most important things that people should be focusing on moving into the future of work?
I'll be very radical, right? Reimagine leadership as collective sense making.
Yep, love it.
Kill organizational culture and make it something around network narratives, or I don't know a trendy term for it, but it's some kind of complex adaptive system, network narratives kind of model. And recognize that any form of trying to measure employees' engagement and experience is deeply flawed. and needs to be removed from the equation entirely, because actually it prevents their collective sense making and decision making by trying to check how engaged they are the whole time. So that's what I would do. I mean, the 3 behavioral shifts, move from there.
Yeah, I love it. And we have a like a power round where we go, if you could suggest or something that someone could do out there to equip them for the future of work and for the transformation of organizations, what would be the one thing that you would give them as a task for a couple of weeks that you think could aid that?
So, I mean, this is literally the coaching I do. So it's recognized that you are not a single self the yourself in all of the roles that you play. Really map out the roles you play, and how those roles should be played according to social expectations, how much of you want to put in those roles, and then look at those roles within the systems that you're operating in, because in each of these systems you can be rewarded by playing these roles in ways that don't harm you but also positively impact the system. So once you can map out yourself in these terms of multiple roles in multiple systems and work out how you create value across all of those roles in all of those systems, you're going to be in a really good place. So that's the kind of stuff I try and coach people, and I think it's the most valuable thing anybody can do. Is look at themselves through the lens of roles and systems rather than through the lens of the inner psychology and the authentic self.
Yeah.
Brilliant
insights. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Absolute pleasure. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah,
Certainly
really enjoyed it. It's fantastic. Well, thank you, Dr. Richard Claydon, for sitting with us today on the What's Next podcast and lending us all your insight about the future of transformation and the future of leadership. It has been an absolute blast. Dave, anything from you to close? He's frozen.
No, that's it.
Technological failure to end. That's always
exactly. Fantastic. Once again, thanks for your time.
Pleasure.
That's the end of today's episode. Thanks for listening. What's Next is brought to you by The Next. We are workplace futurists and transformation facilitators. You can reach us on the web at www.thenextnxt.com.au. Please ensure you subscribe to our channel to ensure you don't miss our up and coming episodes.